Thank you to those of you who have already joined us bright and early this morning. I could see that some of you were in about 10 minutes ago, which is brilliant. You're very keen. That's what we love to see. So welcome. I'm just going to give it another minute or so for anybody who is just joining us now to get onto the call. While we're waiting for anybody else who's going to be joining us, it would be great if you could pop into the chat who you are, what company you're from, and what you do, and where in the country or the world you are joining us from today. So we usually have a really good kind of UK split, and also often we get people dialing in from different places in the world as well. So it's always good to see. Hi, Lauren. People Director at OneCare, a small NHS organisation in Bristol. Welcome. Thank you for introducing yourself. What's the weather looking like in Bristol today? It's nice and bright and sunny here. I'm in Northampton today. Hi, Sarah. Hi, Imogen. Nice to see you. Imogen and I used to work together. It's great to see you on the call, Imogen. Thanks for joining. Hi, Gareth. People partner for a premium service office provider called Argyll, based in London, dialing in from Essex. Welcome to the call, Gareth. Thanks for introducing yourself. Hi, Sarah, HR advisor and manufacturer of holiday homes in Hull. Gosh, I bet it's a busy time of the year in the holiday home industry. Although maybe you're busier before the main kind of peak holiday season. Welcome. Another Bristol representative. Hi, Steph. Hi, Sam. Head of people at a beauty tech company. All coming in thick and fast now. Welcome. So we've got Nottingham, Guernsey, was working for John Lewis until I recognise your name. Welcome to the call. Hope the change of job, hope the move to Specsavers is going well, Christina. We've got Gertruda and Stacey. Hi there. OD role at the Bank of England, but keen to transfer to a partnering role. So hopefully what we cover today will be helpful. Brilliant. Thank you so much. There's lots of introductions coming in. It's great to get a sense of who we've got on the call and whereabouts you are based. So keep those coming in. Hi, Jill, talent manager from John Lewis. So did we work together at John Lewis? Maybe we did. Nice to meet you. Great. Okay, well, keep those introductions coming in. I'll keep an eye on them. I can't say hello to everybody, but hello to everybody and welcome from wherever you are. So my name is Sarah Price and I work for Let's Talk Talent. I'm a senior consultant for Let's Talk Talent. And we are for those of you who might not know already, we are a talent management and OD consultancy. We're based in London and we work globally. And as part of our commitment to supporting organisations to get, keep and grow brilliant people, we run webinars like this one every couple of weeks for the HR community, with whom we have a lot of strong connections. A lot of the people who we work with in organisations are in that kind of HR community. So it's a space that we know pretty well. And I'll tell you about my background in a second, but that's kind of my background too. So HR people are our people. And our core belief is that everybody has potential. The question is the potential for what? And that's kind of, what we focus on, get, keep and grow brilliant people and find out what their potential is for and help them to maximise that. So today's webinar will be about 45 minutes long. We'll finish by 10. It will be interactive. So I've got some questions and some polls for you. And also, please feel free to ask you any questions that spring to mind as we go through the session as well. So I'll cover questions as we go along rather than wait for them all at the end, because I know the closer it gets to 10 o'clock, the more you'll be starting to think about what you've got to do next in your day. So please do drop any questions in the chat as we go along. So a little bit about me for anyone who doesn't know me. So I have done many learning, leadership and talent roles, and I've also worked in operational parts of businesses as well. I don't know whether I should be saying this now because it sort of feels quite exposing to say that I've been leading teams of all levels in organisations of varying sizes for more than 25 years, which is really scary. And for 20 of those years, I've been in the talent, performance, leadership development and learning space. So I think I've done most roles in those kind of disciplines. And I've worked in setups where either I've been in a centre of expertise, so I've worked really closely through business partners, or I've been in a partnering role myself. So I know what it's like in that HR business partnering role, and we'll get a bit more into that as we go through the call today. And the thing that I'm passionate about is that everyone's got potential, and supporting and challenging people to enable that potential to be unlocked. So I love running sessions like this in support of people like you. So what we're focusing on today then is I've recently been, I work with a lot of HR business partners, but I've recently been working with a HR business partnering team at a client of ours who are a non-profit organisation in the digital and technology space. And we're going to use their kind of situation as a case study today. So when I started to work with them, and you might recognise this in the roles that you're in HR or people teams, or as a HR manager in a small organisation, their HR business partners are dealing with a wide variety of challenges, as is always the case, I think, including new situations that are coming up now, stemming from the kind of volatility and uncertainty in the world and in the markets, broadening generational differences in the workplace, an increasing understanding of mental health, neurodiversity, and the requirement of development of policies and approaches that are inclusive of that, and just everything more complex and everything going at a faster pace. And I think I'd be surprised, tell me if I'm wrong, I'd be surprised if there's anybody on the call now who doesn't recognise that. I think that's the case for everybody who is partnering a business in some way in the HR space. So really sensibly, they wanted to ensure that they were equipped with the skills, the behaviours, and an approach that they could rely on in any situation. And it's worth me saying they were very capable HR business partners and varying degrees of experience, but they wanted to have that kind of sense of, I've got something I can fall back on to handle whatever situation I'm going to be walking into at any point in time, no matter what the size or the complexity of that is, whether it's a very specific situation, whether I'm supporting a kind of, a large restructure or a smaller restructure, whatever it is. So this was about kind of developing further competence and confidence to handle whatever was coming at them. So I spent quite a bit of time with them looking at their role, the situations they face, the challenges that they deal with. And we worked on a number of key skills and behaviours that would serve them well across all of those situations. And we shared with them our partnering framework that we use all the time at Let's Talk Talent as a way of applying a kind of trusted structure and a process to some of the situations that they were finding themselves dealing with, which they could then use to work their way through it, take their stakeholders with them, and figure out useful ways forward when they might not be sure, what at the start, what useful ways forward might be. And also, as again, you might recognise varying degrees of engagement and onboardness from stakeholders depending on the situation. So sometimes not on board, sometimes attached to a specific outcome, which may or may not be the most sensible thing to do in the situation. So in this webinar, I'm going to share with you some of the key elements of the work that I did with them. So we'll be looking at, the role, key skills and behaviours, and that useful framework. So to start us off, I want to ask you some questions that I asked our clients, and their responses to which really kind of, for me, reinforced the size and the complexity potentially of any kind of partnering role in the HR or people space, and just how demanding it can be. So my first question for you is, what kinds of conversations do you typically find yourselves in with your stakeholders as a HR business partner? What are people coming to you for support with? So if you want to drop your answers to that question in the chat, that would be great. And I'm expecting to see quite a wide variety depending on the size of your organisation, the way in which you are supporting your organisation, the kind of work that they do, and therefore the kind of people that you're working with. So what kinds of conversations and situations do you typically find yourselves in? So just waiting for your answers to start coming through. I know you will all be thinking and typing at the same time, so there's often a delay. Thank you, Punita. So how to approach a restructure. That's really common, isn't it? So that is a very common sort of point in time when business stakeholders will come to you because they need your expertise, they need your support, they know that they need to do that in the right way. There are certain legalities around it, particularly if people are going to be displaced as part of that process. So that's a really common one. And sometimes they are fairly small restructures, but can be equally complex. And sometimes you might be supporting an organisation that is going through significant change or transformation. Teaching people managers the basics with having difficult conversations. Yeah, that's a big one, isn't it, Bethany? Always. And sometimes just encouraging people to have those conversations is where you are at. So yeah, totally get that. How to create a high performance culture and how to give great feedback. Yeah, absolutely. Because you might have a centre of expertise like we did, Imogen, when we were in talent at the John Lewis Partnership. You might have a centre of expertise that's doing the work, but actually as the business partners, you are the ones on the ground supporting your senior leaders and your leadership teams to make that happen in practice. So yeah, absolutely. Upskilling employees, dealing with absence, yeah. Talent conversations, succession planning. Oh, there's one, underperformance, usually when it has been ignored for a long period. I really want to reassure you that there's hardly any organisation I've ever worked with where that isn't a challenge. So you're definitely not the only one dealing with that, Stephanie. Change a role level or job description. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, Ali, of course, please go ahead with your question. I'm very happy to answer. Mental health support for neurodiversity. Yes, I've noticed that coming through a lot more, and particularly in the space of this is the challenge that some of our employees are now facing, and we don't have a policy that supports that, or our absence policy doesn't fit with that, or our well-being policy doesn't fit with that, or our wellness policy doesn't fit with that. So yeah, flexible working requests, we're more in that space now as well, aren't we? Yeah. So just as was the case when I was working with our client, and Ali, please do feel free to pop your question straight in the chat and I'll have a look at it as soon as it comes up. Just as was the case with the client that I was working with, you are finding yourselves dealing with a whole variety of conversations and situations. And that was exactly the same for them. And so really helpful to have a kind of trusted set of skills and a framework to be able to rely on as you're jumping from one thing to the next. So my next question, I've got a poll for you on this one, which should pop up on your screens in a second. So what do you see as your role in those conversations? So hopefully the poll for that will pop up on your screen in just a second. If not, here we go. So what do you see as your role in those conversations? Do you see yourself as a confidant, as a consultant, as a coach, as a trusted advisor? Are you doing all of the above, depending on the situation and the person that you're dealing with? What are your thoughts as to what your role is in that? Okay, yeah, no surprise. I think we're still waiting for some answers to come through, but no surprise that most of you see yourselves as all of the above. Some for coaching, some for consultants. You're definitely doing that, aren't you? Confidant is also starting to come through now. But you are, depending on the scenario, you could be any one of those things, couldn't you? And actually, I think you've answered this question already. So I'm not going to ask you to answer this again. But in terms of the situations and the challenges that you find yourself handling, it's broad and it's varied, isn't it? And what came out of this conversation with our client was that as a business partner, you're required to be all of those things and more, and also skilled at supporting the business or the business areas that you partner with through sometimes complex situations. And I think if you are in a HR business partner role, the expectation is you know the answer to all of that. It doesn't matter how long you've been doing the role, what your experience has been, how new this situation is to the world in general, to organizations. You are the person that people will come to for an answer. Or you might have the opposite challenge, that they don't come to you when they should. And that was something that also came out when I was working with our clients on this as well. And it is a lot. So I take my hat off always to people in a business partnering role, because I think it is a really challenging role. Ali, there won't be a certificate after this webinar, no. I mean, it might be worth checking with your organisation whether this would count as kind of professional development, because it should do. But we don't send out certificates for these webinars, because we do have quite a large number of participants generally. So we don't send out certificates, but we can confirm your registration for the event if that would be helpful. So yeah, as a business partner, you know, you're building strong rapport, you're building engagement, you're building credibility. You've got to be fully present and supportive. You might have 1,000,001 other things demanding your attention, but you've got to be fully present. You might be creating that safe environment where a senior leader can talk about how they really feel about a situation. You've got to facilitate their thinking. You've got to take a step back and look at a situation critically when other people maybe aren't. You've got to challenge. You've got to hold boundaries. You've got to tell people what they must do, what they can't do, and keep the responsibility in the right place. So it is, you know, it's a challenging role, isn't it? And it requires a lot. And I think when I had this conversation with our clients, in a way, it was a bit of a relief for them, because they were like, right, okay, this is why I feel really tired doing this job. It's because I'm doing all of these things. But I think it's helpful sometimes to remember that there are some really helpful core skills and behaviours that will always serve you well, no matter what you're supporting your stakeholders with at any point in time, and how it's going, and that are particularly useful to fall back on in more challenging situations. So situations where it's high pressure, high emotions, perhaps your stakeholders are set on one course of action and your role is to bring them to a different way of thinking, or perhaps where a way forward isn't immediately obvious, but they're looking for you to tell them what to do. And I think sometimes we either rely on ourselves to use these skills unconsciously, which I would question as to whether we always do that or not, actually, because we're creatures of habit. And sometimes they drop a bit when it's really a challenging situation. So one of the things that I did with our clients was we worked through this set of skills and behaviours. So I'm not going to go through these in detail today, but I'm very happy to talk to you separately about the work that we did with a client in this space. But we looked at these particular key skills. So, you know, the first one being listening. You will be doing a lot of that. But the reason that I highlighted it was that it's a key skill to fall back on when a conversation feels challenging. So sometimes the best way to get someone to listen to you is to listen to them. So this is Stephen Covey talks about this, as does Mark Goulston, who is author of a book called Just Listen. And he is an ex-hostage negotiator, and he trains FBI and police hostage negotiators. And his number one rule is the best way to get someone to listen to you is to listen to them first. And sometimes I think, particularly if somebody's saying, I want to do this, and you're thinking, oh my goodness, that's the last thing I want you to do. What you can kick into is, I need to start convincing them. But sometimes it's best just to let them talk it all out first. And that way they're more likely to listen to you. So that power of being present, listening at a deeper level than we might do in normal conversations, and then playing back what we're hearing and what seems to be important, can really help you to develop that status of confidant and trusted advisor with credibility. I think as a HR business partner or a HR manager, you might be dealing with situations at times where it's hard to stay neutral, where you might have an opinion on what's happening and the rights and wrongs of that, because you are human as well as being a HR specialist. And so sometimes we have to remind ourselves to remain neutral, even in the most challenging of situations. And what I don't mean by that is saying the right thing. Of course, you're always aiming to say something that is appropriate and helpful. But what I mean is managing mentally what is going on inside of you. Making judgments is normal. We do it all the time. But the problem with that is that it doesn't tend to help us in business partnering conversations, especially if the other person is attached to their view or what they want to do. If you've got judgments going on in your head, even if you don't express them, they can close conversations down, and people pick up on them almost at a subconscious level, and it can make people defensive, because no one likes to feel judged or that they're being told what to do or that what they want to do is wrong. So remaining neutral is really about being curious rather than jumping to conclusions, noticing your judgments and assumptions and not trying to force someone down a particular route, rather exploring the implications of different ways forward with them in a way that doesn't feel like you're pushing them. What you want to do is try and help them to see that for themselves. And the structure that I share with you shortly will help with that. I know that sometimes is easier said than done, but it's a key skill. You will know that asking great questions are important in any situation, and you'll be doing that in your role as a HR partner in whatever form that is. But sometimes when things get tricky or when it feels like all the eyes in the meeting are on you, we ask less questions or we feel under more pressure to have the answers. But actually questions can be quite disarming in a difficult situation, and they can help you to find ways forward even when it feels difficult, and to keep a conversation open, to be able to explore a situation further rather than jumping too quickly to a course of action. Because I think sometimes we feel like our credibility is based on how quickly we can help somebody come to a solution, a way forward, the answer to whatever it is that they're facing into. And sometimes it is more helpful to step back and ask more questions, and that's where you add the value. So with the team that I worked with, we explored a whole host of particularly helpful questions that you might want to think about, when you are partnering. So you might, as a result of this webinar, want to go and think about what are some helpful questions to have up my sleeve that I can keep somewhere that might not be accessible to me mentally when I'm in a tricky situation. Or you might want to have a chat with us about how we can help you with that. We have resources available that have those sorts of questions that might be helpful. Critical thinking this is about looking beyond the immediate symptoms of a situation that are being presented to you as the situation, as the truth, as facts, and looking at the wider context, thinking about what are the root causes, what are all the root causes, thinking about, is this, there's their truth, there's your truth, and then there's the whole truth. And usually neither one of you has the whole truth in a situation, but as human beings, we get very good at telling ourselves that we are seeing the whole picture, and that's when we miss things. So critical thinking is really about questioning, what am I hearing, but also about questioning your own thinking. Am I telling myself that I've got a good view of this situation? Is that the truth? What else might I be missing? It's about recognizing the reactions, your own and others, recognizing that probably what you're looking at and what you're hearing will have elements of bias in it. And it's about gathering and evidencing systematically before deciding on a way forward. So this will help to build your confidence that any decision or solution or intervention that you are coming up with is based on sound and robust reasoning rather than assumptions or bias or just being swayed by the most powerful voice in the room, which I know can be difficult to manage sometimes. And then challenging from a place of support is, of course, a key element of your role and how you add value. So done well, using the other skills that we've already talked about, this helps to build that trust and credibility, and also to influence the situation in a useful direction, which is really important part of your role. And you can do that without it feeling personal to the person if you are lining up all of those other skills on this slide behind that. And I think the thing to call out here is that there's nothing on this slide that you won't be nodding and thinking, yeah, absolutely. And you're probably thinking, I do that, which is brilliant. The thing I think is that they sound so simple and straightforward in principle, and they are straightforward, but they're not necessarily easy to do in practice, especially in some of the situations that you'll be dealing with. So what I worked with our client on, that we don't have the time to do today, but I'm happy to kind of talk to you about separately, is how to do this in practice and how to do it in those situations that they found more challenging, and how to manage what might be going on in you so that you can stay clear, calm and confident, and you're able to properly work a situation through, rather than feeling, as we sometimes might, that your only choices are to agree with something, even if you feel it might not be the best way forward, or disagree, which is then damaging the relationship in the process, and neither of those feels favourable. So I hope this is kind of helping so far. Maybe let me know in the chat if what I'm saying is useful for you. So even when you're using those skills and behaviours that will always serve you well, without a framework or a process to rely on in those complex situations that you're supporting, there are some potential risks or traps that you could fall into, aren't there? So I'd love to hear, thanks Christina, that's good to hear. I'd love to hear what's your view on the kind of potential risks that might trip you up as a HR business partner when you're dealing with complex situations? What are the kind of things that you're conscious of that you could fall into when you are in that partnering role with your stakeholders and you're supporting the sorts of things that you're supporting them with? So if you could pop your experience of that or your view on that in the chat, that would be really helpful. Because there are a few that you're navigating, aren't there? And I'm going to talk to some of the ones that kind of struck me as I was working with this client in a second. But I'd love to hear kind of what's your view on the potential risks? What are the things that worry you? So you might worry that you're going to offer some advice and potentially you'll then find out that, you know, legislation has changed, or actually you weren't in possession of the full facts. And so the advice you've given isn't accurate and somebody's going to go and act on that. Thank you, Panita. Damaging relationships. I think that is something that in a partnering role, people are often really conscious of. You know, how do I handle this in a way that maintains the relationship? Because we need to be able to work closely together in order for me to support this person, potentially on a long-term basis. Not knowing the full picture. Absolutely, Lauren. People will present their version of the story to you. And it's not that they don't believe that that's true. It's just that it's just their perspective, and there's always more than one perspective. So how do you get under that? You know, the risk, I guess, is that you take an action and then you find out more information that means that actually that wasn't the best thing to do. Dealing with employees who don't behave well but have a protected characteristic, so they potential high risk. Absolutely. Managing both what the manager wants to do and what it's okay to do from a legal perspective. And with our increasing understanding of inclusion, our intent to have more diverse workplaces and to treat everybody in a way that is fair and equitable, that becomes something that is even more present and even more important, doesn't it? Struggling against what people have done before and what they believe is the way the situation should be handled. Yeah, absolutely. So sometimes your more experienced stakeholders, that can be a challenge with them, can't it? Well, this is the way we've always done it, or HR have always done this for us. Why are you not going to do it this time? Yeah. Ensuring that people strategy and organizational strategy are aligned. Yeah. Sometimes the advice and coaching given feels to the manager that they are conflicting because of the risk that you highlight. Yeah, absolutely. So you're holding numbers of different pieces of a jigsaw that all need to fit together, and the manager's perspective may not necessarily align with that. Absolutely. Managers not following the process or the policy. Yeah. People wanting you to take the problem off their hands. Absolutely. These are all risks that can trip you up, or that you can inadvertently fall into because you are trying to navigate those challenges and maintain the relationship. And the sorts of risks that this particular client came up with, or that we talked about, was, you know, you can be driven to act quickly to solve the problem. You're often called into firefights. You know, somebody needs an answer straight away. And the challenge with that is that if you are being driven to give an answer straight away, and also in your personality, you are the sort of person that likes to do that, you are very solution focused, that might mean that you jump a bit too quick to solution, and that is a risk. Just as you've called out, making decisions when actually you don't have full view of the wider landscape or the whole picture, but you don't know that you don't have that wider view. Sometimes you can feel overwhelmed by all the components of a complex situation and a kind of, where do we start? The risk being that either you start in the wrong place, you don't start at all. You've talked about this presentation of information as facts when actually they're opinions or judgments or assumptions, but it's hard to know that. And when you've got those strong stakeholders who are kind of exerting, they've got a strong opinion, they've already decided, and they don't really want to be questioned or challenged. So all of those things can then influence decisions, actions, solutions being implemented that might be subject to, to risks, to not necessarily being the best thing to do in the scenario. So what we shared with our client was an approach that we use at Let's Talk Talent all the time, because we are partnering with organisations all the time who are facing into different things that we're supporting them with. And this framework ensures that you're getting all the information you need to be able to take a more objective view, that you are using the information to guide you to build and implement a plan of action, and to make it more likely that the plan of action will achieve the outcomes that you want it to. And this is our framework, but it's based on best practice kind of OD and consulting approaches. So sometimes you see 5 steps, sometimes you see 7. They're all essentially these activities. So if I walk these through briefly, and I'm at the end of this, we'll give you a link to be able to request a longer conversation with me, and we can provide more support in you kind of using this framework if that's something that would be helpful. So the discovery phase is that moment of stepping back and gathering as much information as you can to get the insight you need to be able to determine what needs to happen. And it's also about, it's not just taking things at face value in that first conversation or as the whole picture. It's also about being really clear on the scope of the work that needs to be done, so that you're managing the possibility of it growing arms and legs as you get further into it, or it becoming obvious that deadlines and timelines that you've agreed to aren't feasible. It's asking as many questions as you can about the current situation and getting answers to those questions from different sources, not just the person who's presenting to you. And also getting really clear about what we call the North Star. So what is the ultimate aim of whatever we put into place in this situation? And often your stakeholders won't know the answer to that question, and often we don't ask them. And one of the things that our client took away as a key piece of learning through the practices that we did with them was that if you get that North Star in place, it guides everything else that you do. And you can then challenge from a place of, well, you are saying that this is what we're aiming for, but these actions are going to take us in this direction. So your choice, we can do these things, but they won't take us here. And that's a really good, robust, credible conversation. The insight phase that we do is then about reviewing all of that information and evaluating what it's telling you. Now, you can do that you can be doing that mentally in a conversation. You just have to switch it on consciously. Or if it's a bigger piece of work, it's then about stepping back and doing that. And one of the key learnings from my client was that it's okay to say, do you know what, we need to take a step back and work this through and figure out what this information is telling us. You can feel under pressure that you've got to come up with that straight away, but it's fine to say we need some time to be able to do this properly. So this is where you're using that critical thinking. You might be needing to reframe the current situation. You're identifying key priorities. You're ruling out red herrings, which there always are. And you're playing back to your stakeholders, this is what I think I'm seeing, and you're testing that and you're testing their reaction. And what I've noticed is that sometimes we don't spend as much time here as it might be helpful to, because often we jump quickly from discovery to design. So design is where a lot of us like to sit, because it's where the action is, and it's where organizations push us to be, because things need to happen fast. So this is about planning your actions, planning your solutions, planning your interventions. But it's not just about just action planning. It's about focused action planning in this model, based on that North Star, using the North Star all the time to make sure that whatever you're planning is going to get the outcomes that you're aiming for, the real outcomes that you need to get to. And also looking at what's the shift between the starting point and the outcomes that we require, and therefore how long is that likely to take, so that you're not agreeing to unrealistic timescales. And then these become the priority areas that you identify, then become your work streams. So we get a little bit into kind of project planning space. They become your work streams. You're also thinking at this stage, though, about risks and dependencies. What's happening elsewhere that this work could or should connect with, and being proactive about connecting with that at this stage, because otherwise it scuppers you at implementation stage when somebody says, oh, so-and-so over there is working on this. You should be talking to each other. And you find either they've done half the work already, or they're taking something in a completely different direction. So that they are all important considerations as part of your design and your planning. You're then building out your timeline and your implementation plan. And what I did with our client, which they found a really helpful exercise as I facilitated them through it, was doing that in a very practical, visual way, kind of getting it up on the wall. So what that meant was they stepped back and they could suddenly start to see things that linked, that they hadn't realized linked, things that they were missing. And that is a brilliant way of managing stakeholders as well. If you get them to step back and look at it in that way with you, they start to see things that they may not have noticed or didn't want to see before. And at this stage, you're planning your evaluation as well, which is really important, and being realistic with your measures, which are often not as simple as they sound, because in our space, in the people space, measures are impacted by so many different things. So it's also about being really clear that our measures are the right measures and they're not going to be affected by things that are outside of the control of this piece of work. So you're then making it happen with your implementation, but you're doing the steps beforehand rather than rushing to that. And you're then doing the evaluation piece, which often gets missed because we deliver and then we're on to the next thing that we've got to deliver. And this is something that our client noticed, that they were missing an opportunity to learn as much from what had gone well and how that had been achieved as they were dealing with the things that hadn't gone so well. So these can seem very straightforward in principle, but in practice, there'll be some elements of the framework that you naturally focus on that either we jump into too quickly, we miss out other steps, or we spend too long there when actually we need to do more work in the other elements. And depending on the situation, there'll be elements of the approach that feel easier or more challenging. So when I did this with my client, we used some case studies to practice this so that they could see in practice, where are the bits that we do really easily? Where are the bits that we spend more time than we need to? What are the bits that we kind of gloss over or we ignore a bit because we don't like doing it, or it feels a bit uncomfortable, or it's not the bit that we enjoy the most? And so that kind of working through a case study and being facilitated by somebody to do that can really help you to see that. But I've got a couple of, I think I'm just going to do one of the polls, Ralph, actually. So I'd love to get a sense of, where's the place that you think you might jump into a bit too quickly, or that you might spend a bit too much time? So as I'm talking about this, what are you noticing about where you might spend a lot of your time when you are working with your stakeholders? Great, so we've got a quick answer that, yeah, we're going straight to design. That doesn't surprise me. That doesn't surprise me at all. And this is what we see a lot. And it is driven by our own desire to sort things out for people, which comes from a place of good intent, and also the pace at which organizations are working, pressure from stakeholders, all the other things that you're dealing with. We tend to jump very quickly to design, and it's risky. It's risky because the design piece puts us in a place where we feel like we're with our stakeholders, we're doing what they need us to do, we're properly supporting them, but it doesn't necessarily enable us to help them to get clear about what is it that they are really aiming for and to challenge that well at the start. And it doesn't necessarily help us to get them in a place where they are seeing the whole situation as well. So brilliant that you've been able to identify that. What that means is that you're probably amazing at making things happen. And what you might want to take away is, how do you get just as skilled at the discovery and insights piece, and how do you maybe pull yourself and your stakeholders back a little bit to be able to do that work properly? And depending on the size and scope of a situation, that might be a bit of time you spend there, or it might be just one or two quick conversations. It doesn't always have to be a lot of time in steps 1 or 2. Great. Okay. Thank you for sharing that. So in terms of the outcomes achieved with our clients, this work and using the framework and using the skills meant that they were able to feel more confident. They increased their credibility with their stakeholders and also increased their influence. And I think it's those first 2 steps coupled with those helpful skills that give you that credibility and influence when you're facing into difficult stuff. They felt they got a more of an ability to get their stakeholders to take a step back and to do that with them, looking objectively at a situation, using that critical thinking. And they had a sense of knowing, okay, I know where to start now. If something comes to me, I don't know where to start. I've got a starting point now, and I've got a set of skills to rely on. So the framework and the skills together can really help in that kind of a situation. I'm conscious that we are whizzing through to 10 o'clock very quickly. I hope this is valuable for you. We've got some resources that as we come towards the kind of closing the session, we've got some resources that you might want to have a look at as a follow-up to this. So the first one, Ralph, if we can put the first one up, I've written a blog on this topic. So if you are interested to download the blog that supports this webinar, it gives a bit more about the context and a bit more about why we are experiencing situations the way that we are as HR business partners. You might find that super helpful. So I can see that some of you are clicking on that now. I'll give you another few seconds to do that before we move on to the next thing. And I'll mention, and you'll get a link to it in a second, while you're clicking on that, I'll just mention that I'm going to show in a second a link where you can request a follow-up conversation with me, because I think HR business partners are under-supported in being able to, not by their managers necessarily, but just in terms of development, to be able to do this work, which I think is big, complex, important work in organisations. So, you know, we're able to support you if you want to have a conversation about that following this session. So the next free resource we've got for you is a white paper, and the white paper is on HR superpowers. So this is looking at how the world is changing and what that means in terms of, you know, what's now needed from the HR community in support of businesses. You know, and you can see one of the things we talk about is hybrid working. There's much more to it than that. Some of the things I've alluded to, the introduction of AI into the workplace, well, the fact that we've got 5 generations of people in the workplace now, the fact that we are working in much more flexible ways, and that brings many more challenges for managers and senior leaders that they need support from the HR population with. So that's a good one to kind of broaden out, you know, your view of what's going on and why you're experiencing the challenges that you are. And then finally, I've got a link for you if you want to follow up on this webinar and have a further conversation about the sorts of things that you're facing into, and potentially, you know, how we might support you to develop the framework that I've worked you through, or some of those key skills that you'd like to work on more. You know, please feel free to kind of request that, and I'll follow up with you after this call, and we'll get a 30-minute free conversation in to explore that further. So I can see that some of you are clicking on that, and I'll just leave that there for a second in case that's something. Of course, if you decide after this webinar, I didn't click, but actually I'd quite like to follow up that webinar, then please do just get in touch with us either through the website. You can contact me on LinkedIn. If you've got my email address, Sarah at letstalktalent.co.uk, you can drop me a message directly. That's all absolutely fine. It's what we're here for. So that's starting to bring us towards the end of the session. Thank you so much for your time. We've got a couple of minutes, so if you do have any questions that you would like to ask before I close the call, please feel free. I'll give you a minute or two to post them in the chat now. Thanks, Imogen. I'm glad you found that a useful session. Thanks, Samantha. Thanks for your feedback. I'll hang on for another second. If you've got a burning question that you're thinking about as I'm talking this through, please feel free to pop it in the chat. If not, we'll close the call in a second or two. Great. Okay. Looks like there are no questions coming through, just lots of thanks. I'm pleased to hear that that's been a useful session for you. And like I say, if you haven't clicked on the follow-up conversation, please do feel free to reach out to us at any time afterwards if we can help you with anything. Brilliant. Thank you very much. So I wish you a great Thursday as you go into whatever's coming next. And I hope that you'll be able to use some of those skills that we've talked about today, and they'll be refreshed at the forefront of your mind. And, you know, brilliant business partnering from this point forward. Thanks, everybody.